Let us, without further ado, go straight to Ann Widdecombe, former MP, of course, former MEP as well, former government minister. Ann, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This very interesting conversation that has been sort of reverberating around various chambers, whether they be echo chambers or not, about what Lee Anderson had to say. I mean, of course, the left is willfully misrepresenting what Lee Anderson said, because he never said we should bring back the death penalty. He just said that it was understandable in certain cases that there was a very good argument for having it. And he also said, in the same breath, it probably won't ever come back. So, I mean, you know, the sort of the raft of madness that's gone around since then is really uncalled for. But what I would say is it's good that we're talking about it, because I would like to have a conversation about sentencing, about why our prison system doesn't seem to work, why there's no space in it, and why people are let out of prison so soon.
Right. Just let me make a comment on the death penalty, since that's how you introduced this. You're quite right. I mean, Lee Anderson didn't say, let's bring it back. He just gave the case for it. I've been making the case for it for many years. But when I was Shadow Home Secretary, I didn't waste any time on trying to bring it back, because in those days we couldn't have done anyway because of EU law, but also because I recognised that there just wasn't a majority in Parliament for doing that. But the biggest argument, as far as I'm concerned, for the death penalty are the statistics from that 5-year experimental period when we abolished the death penalty, and we continued to collect statistics on the basis of the division between capital murder and non-capital murder, other forms of homicide. And the capital murder rate in that period, when we didn't have the death penalty, went up 125%.
Interesting.
125%. Now, to me, that is the ultimate argument that the death penalty is a deterrent.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, well, it is, and that's not a statistic I've heard before, because we always hear from the opposition to the death penalty lot that basically it's not a deterrent.
Well, that is a nonsense. I mean, there is no way of measuring whether it's a deterrent or not when you don't have it. And as I say, in that 5-year experimental period, when we had it and could bring it back, in that 5-year experimental period, when we collected those statistics carefully, that was the result, 125%. Now, if somebody says that's not a deterrent, I want to hear, please, what their statistical argument actually is.
Yes.
And if it's based on now, well, we don't divide it up between capital and non-capital murder anymore. You know, we don't collect the statistics that way. So how can they possibly say it is or it isn't a deterrent?
No, exactly right. And it seems to me that the overarching view of the justice system and of the prison system in this country by the people that run it is that everybody can be rehabilitated, that everybody must have a chance to have another go at being a decent citizen, and that effectively, yes, you can be sent to jail for a long time, but eventually what we'd like to see is you becoming a better person, and we'll let you back out into society. And I think that's the wrong premise on which to run a justice system.
Well, just to give some balance on the other side of that argument, think back to the terrorist attack at London Bridge. And 2 of the people who took on the terrorist and who saved lives were convicted murderers who were going through rehabilitation back into the communities. Let's just remember the other side of it. And also...
I'm not saying you can't rehabilitate people. What I'm saying is the premise that they operate from is that everybody can be that man or that woman.
No, that really isn't the premise they operate from, but they get it wrong. I mean, let's say that. They get it wrong. You don't hear about all the cases they get right, but they do. The parole board does get it wrong. And when they get it wrong, the result can be another human tragedy. But I don't think there's any premise, because I've talked to prison governors the whole time, you know, and they would raise their eyebrows if you suggested that everybody can be rehabilitated. That premise isn't there. The question, the challenging question, is deciding who can be and who can't be. That's where it goes wrong, and that's what needs looking at.
Yes.
And really needs looking at.
And does sentencing not also need looking at, though, as well, Anne? Because a lot of sentencing structures put, you know, a sort of, I don't know, a straitjacket, if you like, on some judges who can only do certain things. They can only make certain sentences available because that's the structure of the system.
If you go back to the 1990s, when I was in the Home Office and Michael Howard was the Home Secretary, we did actually propose what is called honesty in sentencing. So if you give somebody 10 years, they do 10 years, you know, they don't do 5 or 7.5, they do the 10 years.
Right.
So we proposed honesty in sentencing, but which was then dropped by Jack Straw when the Labour Party came in. But I do think there was a problem there, because at the moment, a judge, if he gives 10 years, knows that you'll do 5. So if he wants to ensure that you're going to do 10 years, then he'll give you 15, 20. We suspected that if you went for honesty in sentencing, the judge would give 5, because he would know that you'd do the whole 5, and that therefore it would look as if sentences were really coming down and the deterrent effect of long sentences would just disappear.
Right.
So again, it's complex, but I agree with you entirely, and have done for a long time, that we need to look again at the sentencing structure, and also the way that we do confine judges. I mean, judges will occasionally say from the bench, you know, I would like to have done X, but I find that I can only do Y.
Right. Exactly right. And I mean, 2 high-profile cases just this week alone. David Carrick, the Metropolitan Police officer who's been jailed for 30 life terms but could still come out, albeit not until he's 78, but still possibility is that he could come out. And Gary Glitter, of course, much more high-profile, sentenced to 16 years in prison for offences against children. He then somehow gets released after 8 years. And I mean, I'm just thinking, an awful lot of people have said to me, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you let somebody like him out?
Well, somebody somewhere has concluded that he's no longer a risk.
But that's clearly bonkers, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked at the evidence either way.
Well, I do know, because he's committed these acts against children all of his life. The idea that he suddenly decided no longer is he going to do that so that he can now be released is for the birds, isn't it?
Well, in this much, that it is very rare for somebody who is a natural paedophile just suddenly not to become a natural paedophile. It's a lifelong battle. And there used to be a programme in our prisons, I don't know whether there still is, called the Sex Offender Treatment Programme, which anecdotally claimed great success. When you looked at the statistics, didn't work at all.
No.
So, I mean, I think you're right. It is very, very hard to conclude that a paedophile is suddenly going to change. But on the other hand, and again, also, it makes my point about sentencing. You know, the judge gave 16 years knowing he'd serve 8. You know, under honesty in sentencing, that judge could have given 8 years and there would have been an outcry.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right. And that is part of the problem.
I think you've got to actually look at the sentence itself. You know, 8 years was always going to be too short. But I do not know in any individual case what the evidence is, and nor do you.
No, I get that, but I think the principles are wrong, and I think we both agree on that, and I think the system needs to be restructured with a different set of principles behind it. But have a look at this, Anne, just before we carry on talking about the sentencing problems in this country, the crime problems in this country, and one of the reasons I think people are fearful or less fearful of going to prison is that they know they probably won't. Have a look at this attack in broad daylight in a place called King's Standing in Birmingham.
Police.
I mean, it's not clear why this attack is going on. It's not clear what it's all about, but what you can see is several men fighting in the middle of the day, broad daylight. One of them's got a huge machete, another one's got a plank of wood. This is going on in what looks like a residential neighbourhood. One of the people with one of those mopeds is a Deliveroo driver. I mean, this is going on pretty much on a regular basis around Britain, Anne, every single day.
Indeed. And you've got to ask yourself this question. If you were leaving the house with a knife and you knew that the odds were that you would be stopped, you would be searched, and then, crucially, not only would the knife be confiscated, but that you would be arrested, then that might act as a deterrent. But there is no earthly deterrent at the moment. to people going out with knives. And many years ago, I did a programme on girl gangs. They all routinely put a knife in their handbag and were shocked when I said that, you know, I would never dream of doing that.
Right.
They did it as routinely as putting a lipstick in their handbags. And some of them had used those knives.
Yeah.
Now, if they had known when they were going out for a good night out that they were going to be stopped and searched and arrested and processed, then they wouldn't do it. But there is absolutely no deterrent. Every time that any Home Secretary tries to stop and search, there's an outcry from the left about how they'll pick particularly, you know, that it's racism, they'll pick particularly on certain sections of the community, etc. But that's the only thing. You don't have policing anymore. You know, the chances, if you're going to go and start a fracas in the street, of a policeman also being in that street are frankly sub-zero.
Yeah.
So you need policing, you need stop and search, and then you don't just caution them and send them on their way, you actually arrest them and process them through the courts.
Yes, but of course the court system... No, it really isn't difficult, is it? But the court system is stagnated because there's not enough, apparently, judges, and there's not enough courts that are open to settle all of the cases that are going through the courts. They're moving people into prisons on remand who sit there for months on end because they can't be seen in the courts, and so therefore then there's no more spaces in the prisons. I mean, the whole system has sort of ground to a halt. Collectively, I don't know why, and I don't know who's in charge of it, and why the hell they can't fix it.
Well, I mean, it does seem to me, you know, fairly straightforward, because in the long term, or indeed not even in the long term, in the medium term, there are savings from having deterrent measures in place. So it does actually pay to supply the prison places, to supply the police, to make sure that there is a great deal of police activity. It actually pays to do that, because you have the deterrent effect and therefore crime falls. And that really can be done. And when burglary got completely out of control in the 1990s, Michael Howard, again at the same time I was in the Home Office, introduced a mandatory prison term for a third offence. It was mandatory, there was no choice.
Yeah.
A third offence, you know, that's the stage we've got to, where people are getting away with 20, 25 offences.
I know, incredible. I know you've got to run, and just one final question. Dominic Raab this morning in the Telegraph talking about the accusations of him being a bully. He says high standards don't make you a bully. He's right, isn't he?
He's absolutely right. I mean, now bullying is cried at the drop of the hat. You know, a boss raises his voice. Oh, that's bullying. A boss criticises your work. Oh, that's bullying. What are the bosses for? What are they for except to demand sound work and to criticise poor work?
Yeah, and if they can't do that, what is the point of having an office structure? What is the point of doing any job? And if you're in government, of course there's going to be clashes with people because you're trying to push through your own particular ideas.
I mean, we've just got things out of all proportion on so many fronts. I mean, one is bullying, as I say, if somebody only has to raise their voice in irritation and they're accused of bullying. You know, some man touches a woman's shoulder in sympathy. Oh, it's an unwanted sexual assault. I mean, we have just got everything out of proportion. Common sense has gone out of the window.
I know. Well, thank God that we're still talking about common sense, Anne. You're one of the few people that is still imbued with it. That's why you're on the Independent Republic. Thank you very much indeed. Ann Widdecombe, have a great weekend.